The sun was setting over Lake Champlain, casting a golden glow across the water that seemed to make everything shimmer with possibility. That's how I remember it now, the day that changed everything. It was one of those perfect summer evenings when the air hangs warm and still, carrying the scent of sunscreen and barbecue from further down the shore. I hadn't planned on attending the community paddleboarding event. In fact, I nearly talked myself out of it 3 times before finally forcing myself to go. That's typical for me, Alex, the perpetual overthinker. I've always been the reserved one, more comfortable observing life than participating in it, finding solace in my thoughts rather than in crowds of strangers. I arrived at the lakeside event feeling out of place, clutching my water bottle like a lifeline as I surveyed the scene. People were laughing, mingling, seemingly so at ease with one another. How do they do that? I wondered, that familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. The event coordinator was explaining how the paddleboards would be distributed, her voice barely audible over the excited chatter. I caught fragments, something about limited equipment, taking turns, and enjoying the sunset from the water. I hung back, as I always do, waiting for the crowd to thin before making my approach. That's when I first noticed him. Jake. He stood out immediately, not just because of his height or the easy smile that seemed permanently etched on his face, but because of the way others gravitated toward him. He laughed openly, gestured expressively when he spoke, and seemed completely comfortable in his own skin. Everything I wasn't. I found myself watching him, curious about what it would be like to move through the world with such apparent ease. Our eyes met briefly across the crowd, and I quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring. As the event progressed, people began claiming paddleboards and heading out onto the water. I waited patiently, hoping there would still be one available when I finally worked up the courage to step forward. The crowd had thinned considerably when I decided it was time. I approached the equipment area just as Jake was doing the same. We both reached for the last remaining paddleboard at exactly the same moment, our hands brushing briefly before we both pulled back. "Oh, sorry," I said automatically, taking a step back. "You go ahead." Jake tilted his head, studying me with curious eyes. "No way. You were here at the same time. Rock, paper, scissors for it." His smile was disarming, playful in a way that made it impossible not to smile back. "I'm not sure that's the fairest way to decide," I replied, surprising myself with my willingness to engage. I have notoriously bad luck with games of chance. Jake laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Well, we could arm wrestle, but that seems excessive for a paddleboard." He glanced out at the lake, where others were already gliding across the water, then back at the lone board between us. "Or," he said, drawing out the word thoughtfully, "we could share it." I blinked, taken aback by the suggestion. "Share it? Is that even possible?" "Sure it is. I've done it before. It's all about balance, both literal and metaphorical, I guess." He extended his hand. "I'm Jake, by the way." "Alex," I replied, shaking his hand briefly. His grip was firm, his palm warm against mine. "So what do you say, Alex? Want to brave the high seas with me?" His eyes sparkled with challenge and something else I couldn't quite identify. I should have said no. Sharing a paddleboard with a stranger, an attractive stranger at that, seemed like exactly the kind of situation my anxiety would have a field day with. But something about Jake made me want to step outside my comfort zone, just this once. "Okay," I said, the word escaping before I could reconsider. "But I should warn you, I've never done this before." Jake's smile widened. "Perfect. I love first-timers. They have no bad habits to unlearn." He picked up the paddleboard with ease. "I'll take the back since I've got a bit more experience. You'll be up front, which means you'll get the better view." We made our way to the water's edge, Jake explaining the basics of paddleboarding as we went. His instructions were clear and patient, never making me feel inadequate for my lack of experience. When we reached the shoreline, he positioned the board half in the water and guided me through the process of getting on. "Keep your center of gravity low at first," he advised as I knelt on the front of the board, trying to find my balance. "That's it. Now stay steady while I get on." I felt the board shift as Jake climbed on behind me, his movements confident and practiced. The paddleboard dipped slightly under our combined weight, but remained stable. "See? Perfect fit," he said, his voice closer than I expected. "Now let's head out a bit. I'll paddle for now. You just focus on keeping your balance." With strong, even strokes, Jake guided us away from the shore. I remained kneeling, too nervous to attempt standing just yet, acutely aware of his presence behind me. As we moved further from shore, the sounds of the event faded, replaced by the gentle lapping of water against the board and the rhythmic dip and pull of Jake's paddle. "You're doing great," he said after a few minutes. "Want to try standing up? The water's calm enough here." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Okay, tell me what to do." "Put your hands flat on the board in front of you. Then slowly bring one foot forward between your hands, then the other. Keep your knees bent and your core engaged." Following his instructions, I carefully shifted my weight, wobbling slightly as I moved into a standing position. The board rocked beneath us, and I instinctively reached out for balance. "Whoa, steady there," Jake said, his free hand briefly touching my waist to stabilize me. "You've got it. Just find your center." After a moment, the board stopped rocking, and I found myself standing, legs shaking slightly but maintaining balance. A sense of accomplishment washed over me, followed quickly by awareness of how vulnerable I felt, perched on this narrow board with a virtual stranger. "I'm going to stand up too," Jake warned. "The board will move a bit, so be ready." I braced myself as I felt him shift behind me. The paddleboard wobbled precariously for a moment before stabilizing again. And then I felt it, the warmth of his chest against my back as he positioned himself to paddle. Not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Sorry about the close quarters," he said, his voice just above my ear. "Not much room for personal space on these things." "It's okay," I managed, hoping he couldn't sense my sudden nervousness. "I guess that's part of the adventure." Jake chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest. "That's the spirit. Now, let's see what this lake has to offer." As we glided across the water, Jake pointed out landmarks along the shore and told me about the local wildlife. His knowledge of the area was impressive, and I found myself relaxing into the experience, momentarily forgetting about the intimacy of our shared space. The sun continued its descent, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that reflected on the water's surface. "It's beautiful out here," I said, breaking a comfortable silence that had settled between us. "It is," Jake agreed. "This is why I come out every chance I get. There's something about being on the water that puts everything else in perspective." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Despite my initial reservations, I felt calmer out here than I had in weeks. The constant chatter of my anxious mind had quieted, replaced by a simple appreciation for the moment. "Want to try paddling?" Jake asked, interrupting my thoughts. "Oh, I don't know if that's a good idea." I hesitated. "What if I mess up and we both end up in the water? Then we get wet," he said simply. "It's just water, Alex. Besides, I'm a strong swimmer, and I bet you are too." His casual confidence was contagious. "Okay, I'll try." Jake carefully handed the paddle forward. "Keep your strokes even on both sides, or we'll just go in circles." I took the paddle, adjusting my grip as he had shown earlier. My first few strokes were tentative, causing the board to veer slightly to the right. "You're favoring your right side," Jake observed. "Try to put equal force into each stroke." I adjusted, focusing intently on keeping my movements balanced. Slowly, we began moving in a straighter line. "I'm doing it," I exclaimed, surprised by my own excitement. "You're a natural," Jake said, and though I couldn't see his face, I could hear the smile in his voice. "Just keep going like that." As I paddled, I became increasingly aware of Jake behind me. He had shifted slightly, his chest now firmly pressed against my back to maintain our balance as I moved. His hands rested lightly on my hips, ostensibly to help stabilize us, but the touch sent a current of electricity through my body that had nothing to do with balance. "Am I doing this right?" I asked, needing to break the silence that suddenly felt charged with unspoken tension. "Perfect," Jake replied, his voice lower than before. "You've got good instincts." We continued like that for a while, me paddling while Jake guided our direction with subtle shifts of his weight and occasional verbal instructions. I was acutely conscious of every point of contact between us, his chest against my back, his hands on my hips, occasionally our legs brushing as we adjusted our stance. It was intimate in a way I hadn't anticipated, and I found myself both unnerved and exhilarated by the proximity. The tranquility of the moment was shattered when a motorboat sped by too close, sending waves rippling toward us. The paddleboard rocked violently beneath our feet. "Brace yourself," Jake called, his arms suddenly wrapping around my waist as we fought to maintain balance. Despite our efforts, the combined force of the waves and our shifting weight proved too much. The board tipped, and we both tumbled into the lake with a spectacular splash. The water was shockingly cold, driving the air from my lungs as I plunged beneath the surface. I kicked upward, breaking through to air with a gasp. Jake surfaced beside me, pushing wet hair from his eyes. "You okay?" he asked immediately, concern evident in his voice. I nodded, treading water. "Fine. Just surprised." To my own astonishment, I started laughing, a genuine, uninhibited laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. Jake's worried expression melted into relief, then joined my laughter. "Well, I was going to suggest we take a swim at some point, but I was thinking of something a bit more graceful." "Where's the fun in that?" I replied, surprising myself with my playfulness. We swam to the paddleboard, which had flipped upside down and was floating nearby. Jake showed me how to ride it, then demonstrated the technique for climbing back on from the water, a surprisingly difficult maneuver that took me 3 attempts to master. Finally back on the board, both of us soaking wet and slightly breathless, we knelt facing each other. Water dripped from Jake's eyelashes, and his shirt clung to his chest in a way that made it difficult not to stare. He caught me looking and smiled, not the confident grin from earlier, but something softer, more genuine. "You know," he said, "most people would be freaking out right now, complaining about their wet clothes or their ruined phone or something." I glanced down at my soaked attire and shrugged. "My phone's in a waterproof case and clothes dry. Besides, it was kind of fun." Jake studied me for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You're surprising, Alex. When I first saw you hanging back at the event, I thought you were just shy. But there's more to you than that, isn't there?" The directness of his observation caught me off guard. I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," he said gently. "You're cautious, but not because you're afraid of experiences. It's people you're wary of." His insight was uncomfortably accurate. I looked away, focusing on the distant shoreline. "We should probably head back. It'll be dark soon." Jake didn't push, just nodded and moved to resume his position at the back of the board. "You're right. But for what it's worth, I'm glad you decided to share this board with me." We repositioned ourselves, Jake once again at the rear with the paddle, me kneeling at the front. As we started back toward shore, I felt his chest press against my back once more, but this time he didn't maintain that slight distance from before. He was solid and warm against me, his arms occasionally brushing mine as he paddled. It felt like he was holding me without actually holding me, and the sensation was both comforting and confusing. "Can I ask you something?" I said after a while, my voice barely audible over the sound of water. "Anything," Jake replied, his paddling slowing slightly. "Why did you suggest sharing the paddleboard? There were other people you could have asked when you saw there was only one left." Jake was quiet for a moment, his paddling rhythm never faltering. "Honestly, I'd been watching you." My heart skipped a beat. "Watching me? Not in a creepy way," he clarified quickly. I noticed you when you first arrived. You seemed so contained, like you were carrying this whole world inside you that no one else could see." I was curious. His admission left me speechless. I'd been so certain of my invisibility, so comfortable in my role as observer rather than observed, that the idea of someone noticing me, being intrigued by me, was almost incomprehensible. "Plus," Jake added, his tone lightening, "you're cute when you're thinking no one's looking at you." Heat rushed to my cheeks, and I was grateful he couldn't see my face. "I'm not used to people noticing me," I admitted. "Maybe you're not used to noticing when people notice you," he suggested. "There's a difference." We lapsed into silence again, but it was different now, charged with an awareness that hadn't been there before. The sun had nearly set, casting long shadows across the water. The shoreline was growing closer, and with it, the inevitable end to our unexpected adventure. As we approached the beach, I felt a strange reluctance growing within me. Once we reached land, this bubble of intimacy would burst. We would return to being strangers who happened to share a paddleboard for an evening. "Jake," I said, his name feeling strangely significant on my lips. He responded, his chest vibrating against my back. "Thank you for this. For teaching me, and for..." I trailed off, unsure how to articulate what I was feeling. "For pressing my chest against your back and not letting go when we fell," he finished, a smile in his voice. I laughed softly. "Something like that." We reached the shallows, and Jake guided the board alongside a small dock. He hopped off first, then held the board steady while I climbed onto the wooden platform. Standing face to face for the first time since our fall into the lake, I was struck by the intensity in his eyes, a warm brown that seemed to hold the last light of the setting sun. "I don't want this to be it," Jake said suddenly, his usual confidence tempered with vulnerability. "Meeting you, I mean." My heart hammered in my chest. "I don't either," I admitted. He smiled then, relief evident in the relaxing of his shoulders. "Good. Because I know this great coffee place that opens early for the sunrise crowd. The view of the lake is almost as good as from a paddleboard. Are you asking me on a date?" I clarified, needing to be certain. Jake nodded, water still dripping from his hair. "Definitely. Unless you're not interested. In which case, I'm just suggesting a friendly coffee between two guys who fell off a paddleboard together." I couldn't help but smile at his easy humor, the way he offered an out while making it clear what he wanted. "A date sounds good," I said, surprising myself with my directness. We exchanged numbers as we returned the paddleboard, both of us shivering slightly in our wet clothes as the evening air cooled. The event was winding down, most participants already gone, but neither of us seemed in a hurry to leave. "I should probably get home and change," I said eventually, gesturing at my soaked attire. "Yeah, me too," Jake agreed, though he made no move to go. "So tomorrow? Sunrise at Lakeside Coffee." I nodded, already looking forward to it with an eagerness that would have been foreign to me just hours earlier. "I'll be there." As I turned to leave, Jake caught my hand, the touch sending that same electric current through me. "Hey, Alex. I'm really glad there was only one paddleboard left." I smiled, squeezing his hand briefly before letting go. "Me too." That night, as I lay in bed replaying every moment of our unexpected adventure, I realized something had shifted within me. The anxiety that typically accompanied new connections was there, but it was overshadowed by a sense of anticipation, of possibility. For once, I wasn't overthinking or second-guessing. I was simply looking forward to seeing Jake again. Morning came with a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. I arrived at Lakeside Coffee just as the sun was beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Jake was already there, 2 steaming cups on the table in front of him, his face lighting up when he spotted me. "I took a chance on your order," he said as I sat across from him. "Figured you for a latte person." I picked up the cup, inhaling the rich aroma. "Good guess. How did you know?" He shrugged, a playful smile tugging at his lips. "Just a feeling. You seem like someone who appreciates the classics but isn't afraid of a little complexity." Our conversation flowed easily, moving from casual topics, our jobs, favorite books, the best hiking trails around the lake, to deeper waters. Jake spoke about his coming-out journey. The support of his family contrasted with the loss of some friendships. I shared my struggles with anxiety, how it had shaped my relationships and limited my experiences in ways I was only beginning to recognize. "That explains a lot about yesterday," Jake said thoughtfully. "The way you held back at first, but then completely embraced the experience once you decided to trust it." His insight was startling in its accuracy. "I've never thought about it that way," I admitted. "I usually just think of myself as cautious." "Cautious is fine," Jake replied. "It's when caution becomes a cage that it's a problem." We stayed long after our coffee cups were empty, watching the lake come alive with morning activity. When we finally left, Jake walked me to my car, his hand occasionally brushing against mine in a way that seemed both casual and deliberate. "I'd like to see you again," he said as we reached my vehicle. "Maybe something that doesn't involve the risk of getting soaked this time?" I smiled, feeling a confidence I rarely experienced. "I don't know. Getting soaked seemed to work out pretty well for us." Jake laughed, the sound warming me from the inside out. "Fair point. How about dinner, then? Tonight, if you're free?" "Tonight sounds perfect," I replied. He stepped closer, his intention clear in his eyes. "I'd really like to kiss you, Alex. Is that okay?" The directness of his question, the respect implicit in asking, it undid me completely. I nodded, words momentarily beyond my reach. Jake closed the distance between us, one hand coming up to gently cup my cheek as his lips met mine. The kiss was soft at first, a question rather than a demand, but when I responded, leaning into him, it deepened into something more certain. His other arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me closer, chest to chest this time rather than chest to back. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless. His smile was dazzling. "I've been wanting to do that since you first stood up on that paddleboard," he confessed. "Even before I almost tipped us over," I teased. "Especially then. You looked so determined, so focused." It was incredibly attractive. That first kiss led to a second date, and a third, and soon we were spending most of our free time together. Jake introduced me to his circle of friends, easing my integration with his natural social grace. I showed him my favorite hidden spots around town: the used bookstore with the perfect reading nook, the overlook that few tourists knew about, the small art gallery that showcased local talent. Our relationship wasn't without challenges. My anxiety sometimes created barriers where none existed, causing me to withdraw when things felt too intense or too good to be true. Jake's outgoing nature occasionally left me feeling overwhelmed, struggling to match his energy and openness. But we learned to navigate these differences with patience and communication, finding a rhythm that honored both our needs. 2 months after our paddleboarding adventure, we returned to Lake Champlain on a similarly perfect evening. Jake had suggested we rent a paddleboard, just one, for old time's sake. As we glided across the water, me in front and Jake behind, his chest pressed warmly against my back, I reflected on how much had changed since that first shared journey. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked, his voice close to my ear as he paddled steadily. "About how different things would be if there had been 2 paddleboards available that day," I replied honestly. Jake's arms tightened briefly around me. "I like to think we would have found our way to each other eventually, but I'm glad we didn't have to wait." As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in familiar hues of orange and pink, Jake guided us to a small, secluded cove. He anchored the paddleboard in the shallow water, then surprised me by shifting to sit facing me, our knees touching in the limited space. "I wanted to bring you back here," he said, taking my hands in his, "because this is where everything changed for me, where I met the man who would show me what it means to truly connect with someone." My throat tightened with emotion. "Jake, let me finish," he said gently. "You think I helped you open up, taught you to take risks. But the truth is, Alex, you've done the same for me. I was always good at the surface stuff, making friends, being the life of the party. But letting someone see beneath that, really letting them in, that terrified me until you." The vulnerability in his eyes, the raw honesty in his voice, it undid me completely. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against his. "I love you," I whispered, the words escaping before I could consider their weight. Jake's breath caught, his hands tightening around mine. "I love you too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "So much it scares me sometimes." We stayed in that cove until the stars appeared, talking about our fears and hopes, our pasts and possible futures. When we finally paddled back to shore, something had solidified between us, a commitment that went beyond the words we'd spoken. In the months that followed, our relationship deepened in ways I never could have anticipated that first day by the lake. We moved in together the following spring, merging our lives with surprisingly few complications. Jake's extroverted nature balanced my introversion, while my thoughtfulness tempered his occasional impulsiveness. We weren't perfect, no couple is, but we were perfect for each other. A year after our first meeting, we returned once more to Lake Champlain, to the very spot where we'd first shared a paddleboard. The community was hosting the same event, and Jake had insisted we participate. As we approached the equipment area, I noticed there was again just one paddleboard remaining. "Last one," I observed with a smile. "Looks like history repeats itself." Jake grinned, but there was a nervousness to his expression I rarely saw. "Sometimes history needs a little help," he admitted, nodding toward the event coordinator who winked back at him. Before I could question this exchange, Jake took my hands. "Alex, when we first met, we shared this tiny space on the water, and I pressed my chest to your back and didn't let go. Even when we fell, I held on, because something in me knew this was important. You were important." My heart began racing as I realized what was happening. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I don't want to ever let go," he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "I want to share everything with you, the smooth waters and the rough ones, the sunsets and sunrises, the falls and the climbs back up." He opened the box, revealing a simple band of brushed platinum. "Alexander James Mitchell, will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision as I nodded, words momentarily beyond me. Yes, I finally managed, my voice breaking with emotion. Yes, of course I will. Jake slipped the ring onto my finger, then pulled me into an embrace so tight it felt like we might never separate. Around us, people began to applaud, the event participants and staff who had witnessed our moment. I buried my face in Jake's shoulder, overwhelmed by the public display but too happy to truly mind. I hope you don't mind the audience, Jake whispered. I wanted to do it here, where it all began. I pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. It's perfect, I assured him. Everything about this, about us, is perfect. Later, as we paddled out onto the lake, sharing a board just as we had that first day, I marveled at how a single moment of chance had altered the course of my life. If there had been 2 paddleboards available, if either of us had arrived a few minutes earlier or later, if I had given in to my anxiety and stayed home altogether, we might never have found each other. As the sun set on the anniversary of our beginning, Jake's chest pressed warmly against my back, his arms secure around my waist. I realized that some of life's greatest gifts come from its most unexpected moments. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to reach for the last paddleboard, and the wisdom to share it when someone else reaches too. Total _char_count. 18,836.